Loyalty. That was the one thing I never questioned in my marriage. Not because I was naive, but because I believe in the simplicity of trust. You love someone, you commit to them, and that's the end of it. No doubts, no second guessing. Emily and I had been married for 12 years. We had built a life together that looked like something out of Family magazine. A comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood, 2 cars in the driveway, weekend barbecues, and vacations planned months in advance. The kind of life where nothing unexpected was supposed to happen. Then came that Tuesday. I was in the office, sitting at my desk, sifting through emails that all seemed to blend together. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the air smelled of stale coffee, and the distant murmur of my coworkers' conversations filled the background like white noise. Just another normal day, until I caught the way Paul and Jason kept glancing at me. At first, I ignored it. Office gossip was just another part of the routine, something I never paid attention to. But the way they looked at me, like they knew something they weren't sure if they should say, put me on edge. Paul, the louder of the two, muttered something under his breath, just loud enough for me to hear. Poor guy doesn't even know. A strange feeling crept up my spine. It wasn't panic, not yet. Just a tightening in my chest, like my body was bracing for impact before my mind even understood what was coming. I set my pen down and leaned back in my chair, watching them. Jason shifted in his seat, avoiding my gaze. Paul sighed, like he was carrying the weight of something he didn't want to be responsible for. You should hear it from us before it spreads, Paul finally said, his voice quieter than usual. I kept my face neutral. Hear what? Jason hesitated, glancing at Paul as if hoping he'd take over. When neither of them spoke immediately, my patience wore thin. Just say it. Jason exhaled sharply. It's about Emily. The name alone was enough to send a ripple of tension through my body. I kept my expression steady, but inside, something was shifting. Not breaking, not yet, but shifting like cracks forming in glass, too small to see but impossible to ignore. She's been seen around town, Paul continued, rubbing the back of his neck. With a client. You know, those corporate guys, she always schmoozes at events. He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. Not in a professional way. A strange silence settled between us. My brain took in the words, processed them, but refused to react. Jason cleared his throat. It could be nothing, just rumors. But a few of the guys have seen her. Dinners. Hotel bars. Too close. I didn't ask for details. I didn't ask for proof. I didn't need to. Something about the way they said it, carefully, hesitantly, told me they weren't trying to start trouble. They were trying to warn me. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the office without another word. The drive home was a blur. I wasn't thinking about sorrow or disbelief. I wasn't replaying memories, searching for signs I had missed. My mind was clear, sharp, honed in on a single emotion, hatred. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were steady, my breathing even. But inside, I was burning. Emily wasn't home yet. She had a business dinner that evening. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the kitchen light. I didn't bother turning on more. I walked into the living room, sat down in my usual chair, and leaned back. Then I waited. I sat in the dark, waiting. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. The walls that once held memories now felt like they were closing in. The couch where we had spent lazy Sundays, the photos on the mantel, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. It all felt wrong. Like a stage play I had been tricked into starring in. I checked the time. 9:07 p.m. Emily's so-called business dinners always ran late. That wasn't unusual. She worked in corporate sales, which meant entertaining clients, networking, and making deals over overpriced dinners in dimly lit restaurants. It had never bothered me before. I trusted her. But now I saw everything through a different lens. I grabbed my phone, hesitated for a moment, then opened our text thread. What time will you be home? A minute passed. Then 2. Then 3. The dots appeared. She was typing. Then they disappeared. Then they came back. Just finishing up. Probably another hour or so. It's going well. Love you. Love. The words sat on the screen like an insult. I didn't reply. I just stared at the message, feeling the anger simmer beneath my skin. Maybe she wasn't lying. Maybe she really was at dinner, closing a deal, charming some executive into signing a contract. But that maybe was the problem. That doubt, small but suffocating, had never been there before. I stood up and paced the living room, running a hand through my hair. My thoughts bounced between scenarios. What if she was telling the truth? What if my coworkers were wrong? What if this was all some stupid misunderstanding? But then I pictured her sitting across from some client, laughing at his jokes, leaning in just a little too close. Maybe his hand would brush against hers. Maybe it already had. Maybe. I clenched my fists and forced the thought away. I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. I needed something real, something undeniable, and I wasn't going to sit here and wait for it to come to me. The restaurant. By 9:45 p.m., I was parked down the street from La Belle Maison, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. It was the kind of place where deals were made over 5-course meals and bottles of wine that cost more than my monthly car payment. Emily had mentioned it before. She had raved about it. "We should go sometime," she had said. "Maybe for our anniversary." That anniversary never happened. She had been too busy. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, watching the entrance. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the sidewalk, where well-dressed patrons came and went, laughing, smiling, oblivious. I told myself I wasn't here to stalk her. I wasn't some paranoid husband playing detective. I just needed to see. I checked the time again. 9:58 p.m. Then, as if the universe wanted to rip the last shred of doubt from my mind, the restaurant doors opened, and there she was. Emily. She stepped outside, laughing. Not the polite, professional laugh she used at company events, but something else. Something real. Something that wasn't for me. And next to her, too close, too familiar, was a man. He was older, maybe late 40s, with a tailored suit and an air of quiet confidence. Silver hair, expensive watch, the kind of man who could buy whatever he wanted. And right now, it looked like he wanted my wife. Emily touched his arm as they talked. A casual, fleeting touch, but I saw it. I saw it. She never even looked at her phone, never even checked the time. She wasn't rushing home. She wasn't thinking about me. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. My pulse pounded in my ears as I watched them linger outside, saying their goodbyes. Then the final nail in the coffin. He leaned in, and she didn't move away. It wasn't a kiss, not exactly. More like the kind of lingering closeness that made words meaningless. A silent conversation passing between them, heavy with things left unsaid. And then, just like that, they parted. Emily walked toward her car, still smiling. The man turned and disappeared down the street, slipping into a black luxury sedan. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The anger I had felt before had been nothing compared to this. This was pure, undiluted hatred. Not just for her, for myself, for ever believing she was different, for trusting, for not seeing this coming. I could have driven away. I could have gone home and confronted her like a rational man. But I didn't want to be rational. I wanted to know everything. So I waited, and when she finally drove off, I followed. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white as I watched her car pull out of the parking lot. She wasn't in a hurry. No frantic rush home to a waiting husband. No nervous glances at the time. She wasn't thinking about me at all. I let a few cars slip between us before easing onto the road, keeping a safe distance. The streetlights cast long, stretching shadows over the pavement, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger behind the wheel. Like I was slipping into a version of myself I had never met before. This wasn't about trust anymore. That had been shattered the moment she let that man lean in. This was about knowing, about ripping the last bit of doubt out of my chest and setting fire to whatever was left. Emily drove smoothly through the city, following a route so familiar it made my stomach turn. At first, I thought she was heading home. She took the same road she always did, stopping at the same red lights, keeping her speed just a notch below reckless. But then at the last possible second, she took a right instead of a left. Not home. Where are you going, Emily? I kept my breathing steady as I followed her through the streets, my car humming softly against the pavement. The anger I had felt earlier was still there, simmering beneath my skin like a slow burn. But now, something colder had settled in alongside it, focus. She wasn't being careful. That told me one thing. She didn't expect to be followed. She didn't think she needed to be careful. Because in her mind, I was still the same trusting fool she had always counted on. The drive stretched longer than I expected. 10 minutes. 15. I half expected her to pull into a hotel parking lot to confirm the worst in the most cliché way possible. But instead, she turned onto a quiet residential street lined with upscale townhouses. A man's house. It had to be. I slowed down as she pulled into a driveway, turning off her headlights. A sleek, black sedan was already parked there, the same car I had seen earlier. The man's car. She sat there for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel. Maybe she was texting him. Maybe she was taking a deep breath, preparing for whatever came next. Maybe in some sick twist of irony, she was thinking about me, thinking about how to lie to my face when she came home. And she got out of the car. She didn't hesitate, didn't look around. She just walked up to the front door like she belonged there, like she had done this before. The door opened before she even knocked. The man stood there, his silver hair catching the glow of the porch light. He said something I couldn't hear, but it didn't matter. Because she laughed. Not a forced professional laugh. Not the fake politeness she used at work functions. A real laugh. A comfortable, familiar laugh. A laugh meant only for him. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. She stepped inside, and the door shut behind her. I sat in my car, unmoving. My breath was steady, but my hands trembled with the force of what I was holding back. I could have walked up to that door right then and there. I could have banged my fist against it until someone answered. I could have dragged her out onto the front lawn, demanded the truth, watched her scramble for excuses. But that wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed more. I needed everything. The waiting game. I checked the time. 10:27 p.m. I settled back into my seat, my fingers drumming against my thigh. The neighborhood was silent, the only sound the distant hum of passing cars. The longer I sat there, the more the rage inside me twisted into something sharper. This wasn't just some mistake, some drunken accident. This was deliberate, planned. She had told me she was at a business dinner. She had typed the words herself, sent them to me with a little "love you" at the end like she wasn't actively betraying me. I thought back to all the other times she had come home late. The nights I had barely noticed. Had it always been him? A bitter laugh slipped from my lips. How long have I been played? I reached for my phone, opened our text thread again. Still at dinner? The message sat there, unread. I glanced at the house, my grip tightening around the phone. The blinds were closed, but a faint glow seeped through the edges, hinting at life inside. I imagined her there, sitting across from him, smiling like she had nothing to lose. Maybe she was sitting on his couch right now, a glass of wine in her hand, leaning in just a little too close. Maybe she was laughing at something he said, tilting her head in that way she used to do with me. Or maybe, just maybe, she was upstairs, tangled in his sheets, his hands where only mine should have been. The thought sent a fresh wave of anger crashing through me. I wanted to go inside, to rip open that door and watch the lies crumble from her lips. But I didn't, because the longer I waited, the worse it would be for her. She didn't know she had been caught yet, and when the time came, I would make sure she felt every second of it. I sat in my car, unmoving, as the minutes stretched into an hour. The anger hadn't dulled. It hadn't faded into some manageable frustration. If anything, it had sharpened. Every second she spent inside that house added fuel to the fire burning in my gut. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't just talking to him. She had gone there to be with him, and she thought I wouldn't notice. I stared at the house, my fingers drumming against the steering wheel. The windows were still dark, but I didn't need to see what was happening inside. I already knew. A part of me wanted to storm in, to throw the door open and end this right now. But another part of me, the part that had been fooled for God knows how long, wanted to drag this out. To let her lie to me one more time, just so I could watch her destroy herself with her own words. The phone buzzed in my hand. Heading home now. Dinner ran long. You still up? I exhaled through my nose, a humorless chuckle escaping my throat. Dinner ran long. I watched as the front door of the house opened. There she was. She stepped out, smoothing her dress, tucking her hair behind her ear like she had just finished a normal night out. Like she hadn't just walked out of another man's house at nearly midnight. The black sedan in the driveway remained parked. He wasn't coming out to say goodbye this time. He didn't have to. She had already made her choice. I slouched lower in my seat as she climbed into her car and pulled out of the driveway. I let her get a few blocks ahead before I followed. The drive home. She didn't speed. She didn't seem nervous. She drove the way she always did when she came home late. Like she was completely at ease, completely confident that nothing would go wrong. How many times had she done this? How many nights had I been sitting at home, watching TV, believing she was working while she was sneaking out of some other man's bed? My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I gripped the wheel, my fingers twitching. I could tailgate her right now, get right up behind her car, flash my lights, make her panic, make her know I was there. But no, not yet. I let her get home first. Let her pretend her little routine was working one last time. She pulled into the driveway at exactly 11:42 p.m. I waited a few minutes before I followed. I wanted her to settle in, to kick off her shoes, to sit on the couch like nothing had happened. I wanted her to think she had pulled it off. Then, and only then, I pulled in behind her. Her car was still warm when I stepped out. I could already see it in my head. She'd be sitting there, maybe scrolling through her phone, pretending she had just had another exhausting work dinner. Maybe she'd already typed out another lie in case I asked too many questions. I walked up to the front door, my pulse steady, my anger boiling beneath the surface. I stepped inside. She was sitting on the couch, just like I had imagined. Her heels were off, her legs tucked under her, a half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table. She looked up when I entered, her expression shifting from casual to mildly surprised. "Hey, babe," she said, flashing me that same effortless smile she had given me for 12 years. "You're up late." I stood there, watching her. She had no idea. None. Let her talk. Let her hang herself. "You just got home?" I asked, keeping my voice level. She nodded. "Yeah. God, I'm exhausted." The dinner went on forever. She stretched her arms over her head. Some clients just don't know when to stop talking. The audacity. I swallowed, the venom rising in my throat. "Oh yeah," I said. "Must have been a long one." She sighed. "You have no idea." I stepped closer. "Where'd you guys eat?" She didn't hesitate. La Belle Maison. I almost laughed. Lies so effortless, so fluid. She didn't even flinch. I nodded slowly, tilting my head as if I believed her. "And everyone was there?" "Yeah. Well, just the usual crowd. You know how it is." "Yeah." I knew exactly how it was. She took another sip of wine, setting the glass back down. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I blinked, finally breaking eye contact. Because if I kept looking at her, I was afraid I'd say something that would make it impossible to drag this out any longer. I forced a smile. No reason. She grinned and stretched again, settling deeper into the couch. "You should come to bed soon." "I'm wiped." I nodded. "I'll be up in a bit." She yawned, rubbing her eyes. "Good night, babe. Love you." I let her walk upstairs without saying a word. And as I listened to her footsteps fade down the hall, I made a silent promise to myself. Tomorrow the lies end. I stayed downstairs long after Emily had gone to bed. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of the walls settling and the faint hum of the refrigerator. The same house I had lived in for years, the same walls that had once held laughter, lazy Sunday mornings, whispered conversations in the dark. Now, they felt foreign, like I was standing in someone else's home. I sat on the couch, staring at her half-empty wine glass. She had no idea what I knew. No hesitation in her voice. No nervous glances. No signs of guilt or second thoughts. Just lie after lie, rolling off her tongue as easily as breathing. She had gotten away with it before. She thought she had gotten away with it tonight. But the game was over. I pulled out my phone, scrolling back to our messages. Her words were still there, taunting me. "Just finishing up. Probably another hour or so. It's going well. Love you. Heading home now. Dinner ran long. You still up?" Every word was a lie. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I didn't press it. What would I even say? That I had followed her? That I had watched her walk into another man's house and stay there for over an hour? No, that was too easy. I needed her to see it, to feel it. I needed her to look me in the eye and realize she had been caught. I got up, moving through the darkened house. Everything looked the same, but I saw it differently now. The pictures on the wall, vacations, anniversaries, birthdays, felt like relics of a life that didn't exist anymore. A lie we had both been living, but only one of us had known the truth. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. She was asleep, curled up under the blankets, her breathing soft and steady. Peaceful, undisturbed. My jaw clenched. How many nights had she come home like this? How many times had she pretended? Had she ever felt even a flicker of guilt? I leaned against the doorway, watching her for a long time. If I hadn't followed her tonight, I would have gone to bed beside her, none the wiser. I would have believed her, kissed her goodnight, fallen asleep next to a woman who had already chosen someone else. I turned and walked back downstairs. I wasn't going to wake her up. Not yet. Tomorrow, she would wake up thinking it was just another normal day, and then I would rip her world apart. The next morning, the smell of coffee filled the kitchen as Emily came downstairs, stretching with a yawn. She was wearing one of my old shirts, her hair still messy from sleep. "Morning," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Why are you up so early?" I glanced at the clock. 7:12 a.m. I had been awake for hours. "I couldn't sleep," I said, sipping my coffee. She walked over and kissed my cheek, the same way she always did. Like nothing had changed. If I hadn't followed her last night, I would have kissed her back. Instead, I stared at her, at the woman I had spent 12 years building a life with. The woman who had sat across from another man, smiling, touching his arm, walking into his house like she belonged there. She moved to the fridge, pulling out a carton of orange juice. "So, work was crazy last night," she said casually. "I swear these clients just go on and on. I didn't think I'd ever get out of there." She laughed lightly, shaking her head. I barely even looked at my phone. She was still lying? Even now, when she had no idea what I knew, she was still lying. I set my coffee down. "Really?" She turned, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, what?" I shrugged, just wondering if you had fun. Her expression didn't change. She was too good at this. "It wasn't exactly fun," she said, rolling her eyes. "More like exhausting. Exhausting." I thought about her sitting on that man's couch, drinking his wine, maybe laughing at something he said. I bet it hadn't been exhausting at all. I nodded, hiding my disgust. "So who all was there?" Emily didn't hesitate. "Just the usual group. Mark, Sophie, Ryan," she trailed off, thinking for a second. "And a couple of the new guys." She didn't say his name, because he wasn't supposed to exist in my world. She turned back to pour her juice, completely unaware of the storm building behind my eyes. I let her keep talking, let her keep lying, because soon she would see the truth staring her in the face. The bomb drops. She was halfway through her toast when I pulled out my phone. I scrolled to the photos I had taken last night, the ones of her and him standing too close outside the restaurant, then the ones of her car in his driveway. I slid my phone across the table. Emily blinked, glancing down at the screen. And then, finally, I saw it. The shift. Her face froze, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. The color drained from her cheeks so fast, it was almost impressive. She stared at the photos like they had just appeared out of thin air. "What?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Where did you get these?" I leaned back in my chair, watching her. "I was at work," I said, keeping my tone casual. "And some of the guys told me something interesting." She swallowed hard. What did they say?" I took another sip of coffee. "That you've been seen around town. With a client." Her breathing hitched. I gave her a second to speak, to say something. Anything, but she just sat there caught, scrambling for an escape that didn't exist. So I leaned in. And then I thought, nah, that can't be true. Not my wife. She wouldn't do that. I paused, letting the words sink in. So I decided to check for myself. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "Guess what I saw?" I asked, tilting my head. She didn't answer. Because what could she say? I gestured toward my phone. "Go on. Say something. You were at dinner, right?" Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I was. I laughed, shaking my head. "No, you weren't." She looked at the pictures again, her hands trembling slightly. I saw the excuses forming in her mind, the damage control spinning as she tried to figure out how to talk her way out of this. And I let her drown in it. I can explain, she finally choked out. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Go ahead. She licked her lips, her hands gripping the table like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. But we both knew there was no explanation good enough. And now, the real fun began. The silence stretched between us like a noose tightening around her neck. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but nothing came out. She was scrambling, searching for the right words, the right excuse, the right lie that would somehow make this all disappear. But there was no way out. I made sure of that. I leaned back in my chair, watching her, studying every twitch of her fingers, every flicker of panic in her eyes. She had spent God knows how long perfecting the art of deception, spinning lies with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. But now she looked like a cornered animal, trapped, gasping for air. I can explain, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I nodded, sipping my coffee. Go ahead. She blinked rapidly, licking her lips, as if buying herself a few more seconds would magically change the situation. It's not what it looks like. A humorless laugh slipped from my throat. Oh, I tilted my head. So you didn't spend the night at another man's house? I wasn't spending the night, she stammered. I was just what, Emily? I cut her off, my voice sharper now. Just having a friendly chat with a client in his house. At 11 o'clock at night? She flinched. It's not like that. Oh, I leaned forward. Then tell me, what is it like? She hesitated. Her brain was short-circuiting, trying to find some shred of plausibility she could twist into a half-truth. I let the silence sit, let her feel the weight of my eyes on her, let her suffocate in her own desperation. She swallowed hard. He's just a business contact. We had a deal to discuss. I was going over some details with him in private because I slammed my hand on the table. She jumped, her breath hitching. Don't lie to me. My voice was calm, too calm, but there was a sharpness underneath it that cut through the air like a blade. She blinked rapidly, her fingers tightening around the table's edge as her entire body tensed. I swear, she whispered. It wasn't. It didn't mean anything. I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. It didn't mean anything? I repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of those words. So you're admitting something happened? Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Caught. I could almost hear the gears in her head grinding against each other, trying to spin the narrative into something less damning. It was a mistake, she whispered, her voice cracking now. It didn't mean anything. I was just what? I snapped. Her eyes darted to my phone, still sitting on the table with the pictures I had taken. Evidence she couldn't deny. A tear slid down her cheek. Oh, now the tears came. Now that she had no other option. I laughed, shaking my head. Unbelievable. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away before she could touch me. Please, she begged, her voice breaking. Let me explain. Explain what? My voice was low, steady, dangerous. That you lied to my face? That you walked into another man's house while I was at home, trusting you? That you planned to come home and pretend like nothing happened? She shook her head frantically. I wasn't thinking. No, you were thinking just fine. I interrupted, my tone like ice. You were thinking about yourself, about how to get away with it, about how stupid you must have thought I was. Tears streamed down her face now, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I love you, she whispered. I swear, I love you. It was nothing. I made a mistake, but I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. She flinched again, shrinking into herself. Stop, I said coldly. Just stop. She bit her lip, trembling now, her hands clenched in her lap like she could hold herself together if she just gripped hard enough. For the first time since this started, I saw it. The fear, not of losing me. No, she feared the consequences. She had built her perfect life, balanced her lies so carefully, convinced herself that she could have everything: a husband, a home, a safe life while sneaking around with her secret lover like it was just a hobby. And now it was falling apart. I leaned over the table, lowering my voice. Do you think I'm stupid, Emily? She shook her head quickly, eyes wide. No, I never. I slammed my fist onto the table, and she jumped. Then why the hell did you think you could play me? More tears, more shaking, more pitiful gasps for air. But no more excuses. She knew it was over, and I wasn't done yet. You know what's funny? I said, letting out a short, humorless laugh. If I hadn't found out, you would have gone right on doing it. Wouldn't you? She opened her mouth, closed it. That hesitation, that half-second of silence, that was my answer. I shook my head, exhaling sharply. You weren't going to stop. She wiped at her face with shaking hands. I swear I was going to tell you. Another lie. I just stared at her. Who is he? She froze. And that told me everything I needed to know. She knew I wasn't asking. I was giving her one last chance to come clean. Her bottom lip trembled, and for a second, she looked at me like she wanted to say it. But then she shook her head. It doesn't matter. I smiled. Not because I was amused, because this was the moment she truly lost. Oh, it matters, I said quietly. It matters a lot. I reached for my phone, swiping to the picture I'd taken outside the restaurant, the one where he was standing next to her, leaning in too close. I turned the screen to her. Say his name. She squeezed her eyes shut. Please. I dropped the phone on the table. Say his name. She shook her head, sobbing now, curling into herself like a child trying to disappear. I laughed, because this was it. The moment she realized there was no way out. And the real punishment hadn't even begun yet. Emily sat there, shoulders hunched, her hands gripping the edges of the chair like she needed something to hold on to. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps, her face streaked with tears. She looked so small now. Not the confident woman who had walked into another man's house without hesitation. Not the perfect wife she had pretended to be for 12 years. Now, she was just a liar caught in her own web. I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, watching her, letting the weight of everything she had done settle onto her shoulders like a boulder she could no longer carry. She still hadn't said his name. I wasn't going to ask again. She had already lost that privilege. I let the silence stretch between us. Let her sit in it, drown in it. Let her feel the same suffocating weight that had been pressing against my chest since the moment I found out. She had spent so much time controlling the narrative, twisting the truth to fit her convenience. Now, she had no control left. I finally exhaled through my nose and shook my head. You disgust me. She let out a choked sob, her whole body flinching like the words had physically hit her. Good. I pushed off the counter and grabbed my phone, unlocking it with a swipe of my thumb. Her red-rimmed eyes snapped to the screen. W, what are you doing? Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. I scrolled through my contacts, found the number I was looking for, and pressed call. Her breath hitched. Who are you calling? The line rang once, twice. Then a groggy voice answered. Hello. Emily's entire body stiffened. I smiled. Oh, you recognize the voice, don't you? Hey, Mark? I said casually. Sorry to wake you. Emily let out a strangled noise, shaking her head violently. No, please. I ignored her. Mark cleared his throat, clearly still waking up. Yeah? Everything okay? I let the question hang in the air for a second, my eyes locked on my pathetic excuse of a wife. Oh, I'm great, I said, watching as Emily practically shrank into herself. Just had a quick question for you. Mark hesitated. Okay. I turned my phone around, angling the speaker toward her. Emily, want to tell Mark what you were doing last night? She let out a shuddering sob. No, please, don't do this, she gasped. I gritted my teeth. Don't do this? Oh, now she wanted to beg? Now, she wanted to plead? I let out a short, humorless laugh. What's wrong, Emily? You were fine lying to my face. Lying to Mark. Lying to everyone else. What's different now? Mark's voice sharpened on the other end. Wait, what's going on? I tilted my head. Well, Mark, funny thing. You know how Emily told me she was at a business dinner last night? Yeah. I let that hang in the air. Let the realization start creeping into his voice. I turned my gaze back to Emily, who was now sobbing silently, her hands gripping her hair, rocking slightly in her chair like she was on the verge of breaking. Yeah, see, the thing is, I continued, voice sharp as a knife. She wasn't at any dinner. She was at some other guy's house. And from the looks of it, this wasn't the first time. Silence. Then Mark let out a sharp exhale. You're joking, I scoffed. I wish. Emily finally snapped. She shot out of her chair, lunging toward me, hands outstretched like she was going to grab the phone from my hands, like she still thought she could stop this. I stepped back smoothly, holding the phone out of her reach. She collapsed to her knees instead, sobbing into her hands. Please, please don't tell them. Mark's voice was ice cold now. Wait, who was it? I grinned. Oh, don't worry. I'll be handling that personally. Emily wailed. I'll let it happen. Let her fall apart. Let her realize that this was real, that she had been caught, that she couldn't talk her way out of it. Mark exhaled sharply. Jesus Christ. I let out another dry laugh. Yeah, tell the office. Emily's head snapped up. No, and no. I ended the call. Then I turned back to her. You just ruined your entire reputation. She shook her head frantically, crawling toward me on her knees, her hands clasped together in front of her. Please, I'll do anything, just don't. I stepped back. She froze. Her breathing was shaky, her chest rising and falling in short, erratic gasps. For the first time in 12 years, I saw her clearly. Not as my wife, not as someone I had loved, but as a liar, a coward, a woman who had betrayed everything we had built together and had expected to get away with it. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Then I spoke. I'm done. Her eyes widened, her head shaking wildly, fresh tears spilling down her face. No, and no. I turned and walked toward the stairs. I'll be packing my stuff, I said over my shoulder. Don't talk to me. Don't try to fix this. Don't even look at me. Her sobs turned hysterical. Please. I ignored her. For years, I had been her safety net. The one who forgave, who trusted, who let her lie and manipulate her way out of things. Not anymore. She had made her choice. Now she had to live with it. And I would walk away, and I wouldn't look back.